They left Annie Vega to burn behind bars and forgot her name. Years later, she rode back into town with a U.S. Marshal's badge and a list of 6 men, each one about to remember what they tried to bury. Stagecoach rattled into Redemption Gulch, kicking up a cloud of red dust. A woman stepped down, her dark eyes scanning the rough-and-tumble town. She wore a crisp, new U.S. Marshal's badge pinned to her brown leather vest. "Marshal Ann," she announced to the squinting stage driver, her voice low and steady. Redemption Gulch looked like a place where fortunes were made and lost, often in the same day. Saloons lined the main street, their doors swinging open and shut, spilling out laughter and the clinking of glasses. Men with weathered faces and calloused hands eyed her with suspicion. Marshal Ann wasn't here for gold or glory, she was here for justice. A cold, burning kind of justice that had been simmering in her heart for years. Underneath her calm exterior, a storm raged. Years ago, this town had been her prison, her graveyard. They thought they'd burned Annie Vega to ashes. They were wrong. She adjusted her hat, the brim casting a shadow over her face. No one here knew her, not yet, but they would. Redemption Gulch was about to learn that justice, like a phoenix, can rise from the ashes, carrying a badge and a thirst for revenge. Her gaze hardened as she walked towards the sheriff's office, a promise of reckoning in her every step. As Marshal Ann stepped into the dim sheriff's office, the air seemed to thicken, memories swirling like smoke. It wasn't the smell of stale whiskey and dust that bothered her, but the echo of screams, her own screams. Flashback. Flickering flames danced in Annie's eyes. The jail cell was a furnace. Thorne's face, once so handsome, was now a cruel mask in the orange light. "Sorry, Annie," he'd yelled over the roar of the fire. "Business is business." The other gang members, faces blurred by the smoke, stood by watching her burn. She coughed, her lungs burning, her skin blistering. The iron bars were hot to the touch, but Annie Vega was never one to give up easily. With a surge of adrenaline, she ripped a loose floorboard and jammed it into the lock, finally breaking free. The back of the jail was engulfed, but she saw a small window and dove through it, shards of glass cutting her face and arms. She landed hard, the fall knocking the wind out of her. Scrambling to her feet, she ran, the fire licking at her heels, leaving behind a trail of smoke and a vow of vengeance. End flashback. Marshal Ann blinked, the memory fading. The sheriff, a portly man with a nervous twitch, cleared his throat. "Welcome to Redemption Gulch, Marshal. Hope you brought your fire extinguisher." She just stared at him, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "I brought something better, Sheriff. Justice." "Justice is a slow burn, Sheriff," Marshal Ann replied, her eyes fixed on a wanted poster tacked to the wall. It was a blurry image of a stagecoach robber, but something about the man's stance felt familiar. The sheriff shuffled some papers. "Well, things are usually quiet here, mostly just drunken brawls and the occasional stolen horse." "A stagecoach robbery happened just yesterday," Ann pointed out, tapping the poster. "That's hardly quiet." "Ah, just some lowlifes looking for easy money. They'll be caught soon enough." The sheriff seemed unconcerned, too unconcerned. Ann raised an eyebrow. "Anything missing besides the strongbox?" "Just the usual, cash, jewelry, nothing too important." But Ann knew better. Stagecoaches often carried more than just valuables. They carried secrets, whispers, and sometimes names. She had a feeling this robbery was more than it seemed. "I'll take a look around," she said, grabbing her hat, "see if I can stir up anything." As she walked out, she noticed the sheriff watching her, a flicker of unease in his eyes. He knew something. And Marshal Ann was going to find out what it was, even if it meant digging up the whole town. The robbery might be the thread she needed to unravel the truth about Redemption Gulch and the men who thought they'd gotten away with murder. The sun beat down on Ann as she rode out to the scene of the stagecoach robbery. The tracks were clear, leading towards the mountains. As she surveyed the area, a figure approached on horseback. He was tall and handsome, with a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Marshal," he greeted, tipping his hat. "I'm Mayor Thorne. Heard you were looking into the robbery. A terrible thing, truly." Anne studied him, her expression unreadable. Thorne, the man who had sentenced her to death by fire. He looked older, more distinguished, but the cruelty in his eyes was unmistakable. "Mayor," she replied, her voice carefully neutral, "just doing my job." Of course, of course. Anything I can do to help, just say the word. Redemption Gulch is a peaceful town, but sometimes trouble finds us." He gestured towards the mountains. Probably just some drifters, they'll be long gone by now. Anne dismounted, examining a broken wheel, spoke. Maybe, or maybe they had help, someone who knew the stagecoach route, the schedule. Thorne's smile faltered for a moment. Now, Marshal, you're not suggesting. I'm suggesting I'm not ruling anything out, Mayor. This town may seem peaceful, but I have a feeling there are secrets buried deep beneath the surface. She looked directly at him, her eyes like chips of ice. And I intend to unearth them all. Thorne's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. The game had begun. The next few days were a dance of deception. Anne, as Marshal, attended town meetings, her eyes constantly observing. Thorne, the charming mayor, made sure she was included in every social gathering, every picnic, every church service. He was always nearby, a watchful presence. She learned that Thorne had built Redemption Gulch into a prosperous town, bringing in businesses and attracting settlers. He was respected, admired, even loved. But Anne saw through the facade. She saw the greed in his eyes, the ruthlessness in his decisions. One evening at a town fundraiser, Thorne approached her, a glass of lemonade in his hand. "You seem to be settling in well, Marshal," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm glad to see you taking such an interest in our community." "It's my job to protect the people," Anne replied, taking a sip of her own drink, "from all threats both inside and outside." Thorne chuckled, a noble sentiment, but sometimes, Marshal, the greatest threats are the ones we can't see. "Or the ones we refuse to see, Mayor," Anne countered, her gaze unwavering. "People are often blind to the truth when it's standing right in front of them." He smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Perhaps, but the truth has a way of revealing itself, Marshal, sooner or later." As the music swelled and the townsfolk danced, Anne knew she was getting closer. Thorne was starting to feel the heat, and she intended to turn up the flame. One afternoon, while Thorne was away on business, Anne paid a visit to his office. The door was locked, but a hairpin and a bit of skill quickly solved that problem. The office was lavish, filled with expensive furniture and portraits of Thorne. It reeked of power and arrogance. Anne rifled through his desk, finding contracts, ledgers, and letters. Nothing that directly implicated him in the stagecoach robbery, but plenty of evidence of shady dealings and exploited townsfolk. She was building a case piece by piece. Then she saw it. Tucked away in a small, velvet-lined box was a charred piece of metal. It was a heart-shaped locket blackened by fire. Annie recognized it instantly. It was a gift Thorne had given her years ago, a symbol of their twisted love. A wave of nausea washed over her. He'd kept it. A trophy, a reminder of his cruelty. Whatever the reason, it was proof. Proof that he remembered her, proof that he was the one who had left her to burn. Clenching the locket in her fist, Anne felt the burning rage surge through her veins. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was personal, very personal. She carefully placed the locket back in the box, leaving no trace of her presence. Thorne was coming home soon, and Marshal Anne had a feeling their next conversation would be very interesting indeed. That evening, a family was evicted from their home, their meager belongings piled onto the dusty street. Thorne's men, acting on his orders, were enforcing a new property tax that many couldn't afford. Anne watched from the shadows, her anger simmering. She approached the family, offering them water and a kind word. "This isn't right," she said, her voice low. "There has to be something we can do." The father, a weary man with calloused hands, shook his head. "Thorne owns this town. He makes the rules." "Rules can be changed," Anne replied, a spark of defiance in her eyes. She knew she couldn't directly interfere, not yet, but she could plant a seed of hope, a seed of rebellion. She started by helping the family find temporary shelter, using her own money to buy them food and supplies. Word spread quickly. Soon, other families, also victims of Thorne's greed, sought her help. Anne became a silent benefactor, a shadow of justice in a town ruled by corruption. She used her knowledge of the law to advise them, helping them understand their rights. She couldn't bring back what they had lost, but she could give them something even more valuable: hope. With each act of kindness, Anne felt a flicker of redemption. Maybe, just maybe, she could use her past to make a difference, to protect the innocent. But she knew that true justice wouldn't come until Thorne was brought to his knees. And that was a promise she intended to keep. One evening, while Anne was helping a family repair their damaged roof, a group of Thorne's men arrived, led by a burly brute named Bull Johnson. "Marshal," Bull sneered, his eyes hard. Thorn wants to see you, says you've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Anne calmly climbed down the ladder. Tell the mayor I'll be there when I'm good and ready. Bull chuckled. He wasn't asking. He grabbed Anne's arm, his grip like iron. Without hesitation, Anne twisted free, using a move she hadn't used in years. Bull stumbled back, surprised. He lunged again, and Anne was forced to defend herself. A quick jab to the throat, a swift kick to the leg, and Bull was on the ground, gasping for air. One of the other men, a skinny kid named Billy, stared at Anne in disbelief. As she helped him up, his sleeve rode up his arm, revealing a jagged scar, identical to one Anne had gotten during her escape from the fire. Billy's eyes widened. He looked at Anne, then at the scar, then back at Anne again. "Annie," he whispered, his voice trembling. Anne froze, her heart pounding. The past had finally caught up with her. She stared at Billy, knowing that her carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. "It's Marshal Anne now," she said, her voice cold. But the fear in her eyes told a different story. The game was changing, and the stakes were getting higher. The next morning, Thorne summoned Anne to his office. The charming smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "Marshal," he said, his voice dangerously low, "I heard about what happened last night with Bull and Billy." Anne met his gaze unflinchingly. "Your men interfered with my duties. I defended myself." "Billy seems to think he recognized you," Thorne continued, circling her like a predator. "He said something about a scar that Annie Vega had." Anne remained silent, her face a mask. "You know, Marshal," Thorne said, stopping in front of her, "I always wondered what happened to Annie. I heard she died in that fire, a tragic accident." "Accidents happen," Anne replied, her voice tight. "Indeed they do, but sometimes accidents are orchestrated, planned, just like that stagecoach robbery, perhaps." Anne's hand instinctively went to her gun. Thorne noticed the movement and chuckled. "Easy, Marshal, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying it's a small world, and secrets have a way of coming to light." He leaned closer, his eyes piercing. "Tell me, Marshal Anne, or should I say Annie, what brings you back to Redemption Gulch?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Anne knew she couldn't hide any longer. The game had changed. It was time to play her hand. Before Anne could answer, the church bell began to ring frantically. Smoke billowed from the windows of the general store. Fire. Thorne's eyes widened in alarm. What in blazes? Anne shoved past him, racing out of the office. The general store, the heart of Redemption Gulch, was engulfed in flames. People were screaming, scrambling to escape. The fire was spreading quickly, threatening to consume the entire town. As she ran towards the inferno, memories of her own fiery prison flooded her mind. The heat, the smoke, the desperation. She knew what it was like to be trapped in a burning building. Without hesitation, Anne plunged into the chaos. She helped families evacuate, carried buckets of water, and directed the townsfolk to safety. Despite the danger, she felt a strange sense of purpose. The fire that had once destroyed her was now giving her a chance to save others. But the fire wasn't just an accident, it was a distraction. While everyone was focused on the flames, someone was looting the bank. Anne saw them, Thorne's men, their faces hidden behind bandanas. Thorne had orchestrated this. He was using the fire to cover his tracks, to steal what he couldn't take legally. Anne's rage burned hotter than the flames. This time it wasn't just about revenge. It was about saving Redemption Gulch from the man who was trying to destroy it. As Anne fought the flames, the townsfolk watched in awe. They saw not just a marshal, but a hero. A woman who was willing to risk her life for them. Their respect for Thorne began to crumble. Whispers started, questions about his absence during the crisis, about his sudden wealth. Old man Hemlock, who had lost his store in the fire, pointed a shaky finger at Thorne's mansion on the hill. "He's up there watching us burn," he cried. "He's never cared about this town." The crowd murmured in agreement. Doubts, long suppressed by Thorne's charm and influence, now surfaced like poisonous weeds. They saw the truth, the greed, the corruption that had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. Meanwhile, Anne confronted Thorne's men at the bank. A fierce gunfight erupted, the sound of gunfire echoing through the burning town. Anne, fueled by righteous anger, fought with a ferocity they had never seen. She disarmed them, captured them, and dragged them out into the street for all to see. The townsfolk, witnessing Anne's bravery and Thorne's treachery, finally understood the truth. They had been living under the thumb of a tyrant. and now, thanks to a woman who had risen from the ashes, they were ready to fight back. The tide had turned. Redemption Gulch was about to be redeemed. The fire still raged, but the townsfolk, emboldened by Anne's actions and fueled by their newfound outrage, began to organize. They formed bucket brigades, rescuing what they could from the flames. They confronted Thorne's remaining men, forcing them to retreat. Anne, seeing the spark of rebellion she had ignited, knew it was time to confront Thorne directly. She gathered a group of volunteers, armed with pitchforks, shovels, and whatever else they could find. Together, they marched towards Thorne's mansion on the hill, a united front against tyranny. As they approached the mansion, Thorne appeared on the balcony, his face contorted with fury. "You ungrateful wretches," he shouted. "I built this town, I gave you everything." "You took everything," Old Man Hemlock yelled back, his voice hoarse but strong. "You stole from us, you lied to us, and you tried to burn us alive." "She's turned you against me," Thorne screamed, pointing at Anne. "She's a liar, a criminal, she's Annie Vega." The crowd gasped, but their newfound courage didn't waver. They had seen Anne's true colors, her bravery, her selflessness. They knew that whatever her past, she was on their side now. Anne stepped forward, her voice ringing out across the crowd. "That's right, Thorne, I'm Annie Vega, and I'm here to bring you to justice." She drew her gun, her eyes locked on Thorne's. "It's over." The final showdown was about to begin. The fate of Redemption Gulch hung in the balance. Thorne snarled and disappeared inside the mansion. The townsfolk braced themselves, ready for a fight. Moments later, Thorne emerged, armed with a rifle and flanked by his remaining loyal men. "Get out of my town," he roared, "or you'll all burn like Annie Vega." Anne stood firm, her gun steady in her hand. "This isn't your town, Thorne, it belongs to the people." A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Then Thorne fired. The gunfight erupted. Bullets whizzed past Anne's head as she took cover behind a fallen tree. The townsfolk, though inexperienced, fought bravely, returning fire with whatever they had. Anne knew she had to end this quickly. She couldn't let any more innocent people get hurt. She darted from cover to cover, dodging bullets until she was close enough to the mansion. She kicked open the front door and charged inside, her gun blazing. Thorne's men fell before her one by one. She moved with a speed and precision that belied her years, fueled by a burning desire for justice. Finally, she found Thorne in his study, cowering behind his desk. He looked like a cornered rat, his face pale with fear. "It's over, Thorne," Anne said, her voice cold and unwavering. "Your reign of terror is finished." Thorne was defeated. Thorne pleaded for his life, offering Anne money, power, anything to spare him. But Anne remained unmoved. She had come too far, sacrificed too much to let him off the hook. She raised her gun, pointing it directly at his heart. The townsfolk watched from outside, their faces etched with anticipation. They wanted justice, swift and merciless. But as Anne looked into Thorne's eyes, she saw not just fear, but a flicker of something else, regret. And in that moment, she realized that killing him wouldn't bring her the peace she craved. It would only make her a killer just like him. With a sigh, she lowered her gun. "I'm not going to kill you, Thorne," she said, her voice firm. "That's not who I am anymore." She holstered her weapon and pulled out her U.S. Marshal's badge. "I'm placing you under arrest for arson, robbery, and corruption. You'll stand trial for your crimes, and the law will decide your fate." She dragged Thorne out of the mansion and handed him over to the townsfolk, who cheered and jeered. The reign of terror was truly over. Anne had brought justice to Redemption Gulch, not through vengeance, but through the law. She had finally risen above the ashes of her past, a transformed woman. With Thorne behind bars, Redemption Gulch began to rebuild. The townsfolk, united by their shared experience, worked together to restore their homes and businesses. A new sense of hope and community filled the air. Anne, now known to everyone as Annie Vega, prepared to leave. Her mission was complete. Justice had been served. But as she stood on the edge of town, looking back at the faces of the people she had helped, she hesitated. Old Man Hemlock approached her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Marshal Vega," he said, "we'll never forget what you've done for us, but who's going to protect us now?" Anne looked at the faces of the townsfolk, their eyes pleading. They needed her. They needed someone to guide them, to protect them from future threats. And in that moment she realized that her journey wasn't over. She had come to Redemption Gulch seeking revenge, but she had found something more, a purpose. "I'll stay," she announced, her voice clear and strong. I'll help you rebuild this town. I'll protect you from anyone who tries to harm you." The townsfolk cheered, their faces beaming with joy. Annie Vega, the former outlaw, the woman who had risen from the ashes, had found her home. She would use her skills and experience to forge a new, honest life, protecting the town she had once sought to destroy. Her redemption was complete. Weeks turned into months. Redemption Gulch slowly healed, the scars of the fire fading with each passing day. Annie, now the town's marshal and its protector, worked tirelessly to ensure that justice and fairness prevailed. She helped rebuild the general store, organized a new town council, and established a system for protecting the vulnerable. She used her knowledge of the law, her skills as a fighter, and her unwavering sense of justice to create a safe and prosperous community. One evening, as the sun set over Redemption Gulch, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Annie stood on a small hill overlooking the town. The buildings were rebuilt, the streets were clean, and the faces of the townsfolk were filled with smiles. She looked at the town, no longer a symbol of pain and betrayal, but a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The fire of her past, once a source of torment, was now a source of strength, a reminder of how far she had come. She touched the scar on her arm, a permanent reminder of her ordeal, but it no longer burned with anger. It warmed with pride. She had faced her demons, conquered her past, and found her purpose. Annie Vega, the woman who had risen from the ashes, was finally home. She was the protector of Redemption Gulch, a symbol of hope and justice in a wild and unforgiving land. And as she gazed out over the town, she knew that her future was bright as the flames that had once tried to consume her.